Hey everyone. I've been lurking here for a while, and after reading a ton of posts, I feel like I finally need to share my story. I'm still trying to piece everything together, so bear with me if this gets long or messy. I'm Ethan, 36, and I've been married to my wife, Melissa, 34, for 8 years. We have one son, Jamie, who's 6. I thought we had a pretty normal life. Melissa is a receptionist at a small law firm, and I run a contracting business. We've always been busy, but we made it work, or so I thought. Melissa started acting different about 6 months ago. At first, it was little things. Staying late at work, being glued to her phone, and laughing at texts she wouldn't share. I'd ask her about it and she'd brush it off, saying it was office stuff or that I was being paranoid. I didn't think much of it because she's always been pretty independent, and I trusted her. But then Jamie started mentioning someone named Uncle Rob. He said Rob came over to play games with Mommy while I was at work. I laughed it off at first. Melissa doesn't have a brother and I figured he just misunderstood something. But then one day Jamie said, "Uncle Rob's car is really loud." It woke me up last night. That stopped me in my tracks. Melissa had never mentioned any Rob, and the fact that he was at our house while I was working late made me feel sick. I decided to ask her about it. When I brought it up, she laughed and said Rob was a coworker who stopped by to drop off some papers she forgot at the office. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ethan, you're being ridiculous." I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. I started paying closer attention. She was on her phone all the time, texting late into the night and hiding her screen when I walked by. One night she fell asleep on the couch, and her phone buzzed with a message from Rob W. The preview said, "Can't wait to see you again." Last night my stomach dropped. I didn't open the message, but I couldn't unsee it. I confronted her the next morning. I told her I saw the text and demanded to know what was going on. She gaslit me hard, said I was being controlling, that it was just a joke between co-workers, and that I was invading her privacy. She even had the nerve to cry, saying she couldn't believe I didn't trust her. I didn't push it further at that moment. Instead, I decided to do something I never thought I'd have to do. I set up a camera in our living room. I hated myself for it, but I needed to know the truth. The camera idea kept me awake for hours that night. I felt like I was breaking every rule of trust, but something in my gut told me I wasn't wrong. The next morning I installed it while Melissa and Jamie were out. I put it behind a photo frame on the mantel, subtle but with a good view of the living room. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I'd see nothing and this would prove Melissa was innocent. The first few days were uneventful. Melissa stayed busy, texting away like always, but nothing unusual happened. Then 3 nights later I finally caught something. It was around 10 p.m. and I was finishing a project in the garage. When I came inside, Melissa was already in bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. I checked the camera footage after she fell asleep. At 8:45, a car pulled into the driveway. A man got out, tall and stocky, wearing a leather jacket. He knocked on the door and Melissa let him in without hesitation. She was smiling and they hugged, way too long for it to be casual. I fast-forwarded the footage, trying to prepare myself for what I'd see. They sat on the couch talking and laughing, then Melissa leaned in and kissed him. My heart stopped. I slammed the laptop shut and just sat there, staring at the wall. My wife, Melissa, was kissing another man in the house I built for our family. I barely slept that night. I couldn't confront her yet, I needed more proof. So I let the camera roll and tried to act normal. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me or kissed my cheek, I felt like I was being played. 2 nights later, Rob came back. This time they didn't waste time sitting on the couch. Melissa led him upstairs, our bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to watch what happened next. Just seeing them go into that room was enough to shatter me. The next morning I couldn't look at her. She was her usual bubbly self, chatting about Jamie's upcoming school play and asking me what I wanted for dinner. Meanwhile, I was barely holding it together. I had all the proof I needed, but I didn't know what to do with it. Confronting her seemed too easy. I wanted her to feel the way I did, blindsided and broken. I started digging deeper. I checked her phone while she was showering and found a string of texts with Rob W. Their messages weren't even subtle, Things like, "I wish I could wake up next to you every morning," and "Last night was incredible. You look so sexy in that dress." She saved his contact under a fake name, but didn't bother hiding their conversations. It was like she didn't care if she got caught. I took screenshots of everything. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew I needed all the evidence I could get. By the time I had everything, the videos, the texts, the timestamps of his visits, I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work, and every smile Melissa gave me felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to confront her right away, but I wasn't ready for the fallout. What if she denied everything? What if she spun it back on me? I needed to catch her in a way she couldn't explain her way out of. My chance came sooner than I expected. A few nights later, Melissa told me she was working late. Her tone was casual, like she was giving me the most boring news in the world. I just nodded and said, "Okay, have a good night." I didn't let on that I knew exactly what she was doing, or who she was meeting. As soon as she left, I pulled up the camera feed on my phone. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Rob's car pulled up. I watched him stroll into my house like he owned the place. My blood was boiling. I couldn't sit there and do nothing anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove around the block a few times, trying to calm myself down. I didn't want to go in guns blazing and scare Jamie, who was asleep upstairs. I needed to be smart about this. Finally, I parked a few houses down and walked back. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the front door. The living room was empty, but I could hear muffled voices coming from upstairs, our bedroom. I didn't hesitate. I stormed up the stairs, threw the door open, and there they were. Melissa was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hair a mess, and Rob was standing there with his shirt halfway unbuttoned. The look on her face when she saw me was almost satisfying. Her eyes went wide and she stammered, "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I barked. "What the hell is he doing here?" Rob, to his credit, didn't try to deny it. He raised his hands and said, "Look man, I think we should all just calm down." Like that was going to happen. I stepped toward him and he backed up, bumping into the dresser. "Get out," I growled, pointing to the door. "Right now." He grabbed his shoes and practically ran out of the house. I heard his car peel out of the driveway a second later. That left just me and Melissa, standing in the bedroom that was suddenly unrecognizable to me. She started crying. "Ethan, please let me explain." I folded my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. "Explain what?" "That you've been sneaking this guy into our house while I'm working? That you lied to my face for months." "It wasn't like that." She sobbed. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "Oh really? Because from where I'm standing it looks exactly like what I think." She started spinning a story about how Rob was just a friend, how he was going through a tough time and needed someone to talk to. I cut her off. "I have video of you kissing him. I have texts of you telling him you wish you could wake up next to him. Don't insult me by lying." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. "Just tell me the truth, Melissa," I said quietly. "Why him? Why this?" She sat down on the bed, shaking her head. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely and you've been so busy with work. It just happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All the late nights, the sacrifices I made for our family, and this was her excuse? That she was lonely? My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. I don't care where. But you're not staying here." Her head snapped up. "Ethan, please. Let's talk about this. I can explain." "I'm done talking," I said. "You've already said enough." She begged and pleaded, but I didn't budge. Eventually she grabbed a bag and left, tears streaming down her face. I stood at the door watching her drive away, feeling a strange mix of anger, relief, and heartbreak. Jamie woke up at some point during all this, and I had to reassure him that everything was fine. I tucked him back into bed, but I couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying everything in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Melissa's side of the bed was empty, and for a moment I thought it was all a bad dream. But then Jamie came into the room asking, "Where's Mommy?" And reality hit me like a punch to the gut. "She's staying with a friend for a few days," I told him, trying to sound normal. He didn't ask any more questions, but the look on his face broke me. I couldn't believe how fast our family was falling apart. I called in sick to work that day. I spent most of the morning sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. Around noon, Melissa finally texted me. "Can we please talk? I want to explain everything." I didn't respond right away. Part of me didn't want to hear her excuses, but another part of me needed answers. So I texted back. "Fine. Come over after Jamie's in bed. We'll talk." That evening I put Jamie to bed early and waited. Melissa showed up around 9, looking like she hadn't slept. She walked in and sat at the table without saying a word. I stayed standing, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "So," I said, breaking the silence. "Start talking." She took a deep breath and started in with the excuses. She said Rob was just a friend at first, someone she could vent to about her stress. She claimed it got out of hand and that she never meant to hurt me. She swore up and down that it didn't mean anything, and that she was willing to do whatever it took to fix our marriage. But the more she talked, the more her story fell apart. When I pressed her for details, she got defensive. She claimed she'd only kissed Rob a couple of times, but I knew that wasn't true. When I brought up the texts and the video, she tried to flip it back on me. "Why were you spying on me, Ethan?" she snapped. "Do you even know how invasive that is?" I couldn't believe her audacity. "Invasive?" I shot back. "You brought another man into our house and into our bed. Don't talk to me about invasiveness." She had the nerve to cry, acting like she was the victim in all this. She said she felt neglected, that I was always too busy with work, and that she just needed someone to talk to. I couldn't hold back anymore. "So your solution was to have an affair?" I shouted. "To bring some random guy into our home and lie to my face every single day?" "It wasn't like that," she yelled. I was confused, okay? I didn't know how to handle it. "Confused?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You weren't confused when you let him into our bedroom." She looked like she was about to say something else, but I held up a hand. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore, Melissa. I don't even recognize you." That shut her up. For a moment she just sat there, staring at the floor. Then she said the one thing that made me lose it completely. "I think we should go to counseling." I laughed bitterly. "Counseling? Are you serious? You think some therapist is going to magically fix this?" She didn't answer. She just kept crying, like her tears would make me forget everything she'd done. "I want you out of the house," I said firmly. "I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here." She begged me to reconsider, but I stood my ground. Eventually she left, saying she'd stay at her sister's for now. As soon as the door closed, I felt a wave of relief. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. But the quiet didn't last. The next day I got a call from her sister, Sarah. She said Melissa had told her a different version of the story and wanted to hear my side. When I asked what Melissa had said, Sarah hesitated. "She said you've been distant," Sarah began. "That you've been putting work ahead of your marriage and ignoring her. She admitted she made a mistake, but she said you're blowing things out of proportion." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Blowing things out of proportion? I said. "Did she also mention she's been sneaking her mistake into our house and into our bed while I was working to support her and Jamie?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "No, she didn't mention that." "Of course she didn't," I said. "You know what, Sarah? I'm done with this. If she wants to lie to you, that's her problem." I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. It was clear that Melissa wasn't just lying to me, she was lying to everyone. And now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life without her. A few days passed and the house felt empty without Melissa. Jamie started asking more questions, and I could tell he knew something wasn't right. I kept my answers vague, telling him that Mommy was staying with Aunt Sarah for a little while. It hurt to see the confusion in his eyes, but I didn't know how else to protect him from the mess his mom had created. Melissa, meanwhile, wouldn't stop texting me. Every message was the same. Apologies, promises to change, begging me to meet with her again. I ignored most of them until one caught my attention. It said, "We need to talk about Jamie." I couldn't ignore that. I called her immediately. "What about Jamie?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Is he okay?" "Yes, he's fine," she said quickly. "I just think we need to figure out how we're going to handle this situation. I don't want him caught in the middle." I sighed. "Melissa, you're the one who put him in the middle. What exactly do you want to discuss?" She hesitated. "I think we should talk to him together. He deserves to hear it from both of us." The thought of sitting next to her and pretending we were some united front made my skin crawl, but she wasn't wrong. Jamie deserved the truth, at least some of it. So I agreed to meet her at the park the next day. When we arrived, Jamie was excited to see Melissa. He ran to her, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. No matter how angry I was at her, she was still his mom and he loved her. We sat on a bench while Jamie played on the swings. Melissa looked nervous, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "So, how do we do this?" she asked. "We tell him the truth," I said bluntly. "That we're taking a break because we're having problems. That's all he needs to know right now." She nodded, but I could tell she wanted to say more. "Ethan, I cut her off. "This isn't about us. It's about him." When Jamie came over, we explained as gently as we could. Melissa told him that she loved him very much and that no matter what, we'd always be his parents. I added that we just needed some time apart to figure things out. Jamie didn't seem to understand, but he nodded and went back to playing. Melissa looked like she wanted to cry, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She made her bed. That night I got another surprise. I was scrolling through my emails when I saw one from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "You deserve to know the truth." Curious, I opened it. It was from a woman named Karen. She wrote, "Hi Ethan. You don't know me, but I know Rob. I'm his ex-wife. I found your email through Melissa's Facebook. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I thought you should know that Rob has a history of this kind of behavior. He's done it before. He's very good at manipulating women into believing he's their savior, but it's all an act. I don't know all the details of what's happening with you and Melissa, but if she's involved with him, you need to be careful. Rob has a way of getting what he wants, no matter who he hurts in the process. If you want to talk more, let me know." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I didn't know if Karen was telling the truth, but something about her message felt genuine. It explained why Rob seemed so confident, why he walked into my house like he owned the place. He wasn't just some random guy, he was a professional liar. I decided to reply. I needed to know more about the man who had torn my life apart. The next morning, Karen and I had a long phone call. Her voice was calm but carried a weight of frustration and regret. She started by explaining her history with Rob. They'd been married for 5 years before she caught him having an affair with her co-worker. Apparently this wasn't the first time. He'd had multiple flings, each one more calculated than the last. "Rob knows exactly how to play people," Karen said. "He finds women who are vulnerable, who feel like something is missing in their lives, and he fills that void. At least that's what it feels like at first." I could feel my jaw tightening as she spoke. "How does he get away with it? Doesn't he care about the damage he causes?" She let out a bitter laugh. "No, Ethan. He doesn't care. As long as he gets what he wants, everyone else is disposable. He's charming, persuasive, and knows how to make people feel special. But as soon as the thrill is gone, so is he." Karen shared more details about her own marriage. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way he gaslit her into thinking she was crazy for being suspicious. It all sounded painfully familiar. "Does he get violent?" I asked. Karen paused. "Not physically, at least not with me. But emotionally? Absolutely. He knows how to tear you down and make you think everything is your fault. He'll say whatever he needs to say to keep control." I thanked her for sharing her story and hung up, feeling both angry and validated. Rob wasn't just some opportunistic homewrecker, he was a predator. And Melissa had fallen right into his trap. That evening I called Melissa. I didn't want to talk to her, but I needed to know if she had any idea who she was dealing with. She picked up on the second ring. "Ethan," she said softly, "I've been waiting to hear from you." "Save it," I snapped. "I have a question. Did you know Rob was married?" She hesitated, and I could tell she was trying to think of an answer. "He mentioned it once. He said they divorced because she was controlling and toxic." I laughed bitterly. "Of course that's what he said. Did you ever think to question his version of events?" "What's this about?" she asked, her tone defensive. "I talked to his ex-wife," I said. "Turns out Rob has a habit of doing this, targeting women who are married or vulnerable. You're not the first, Melissa. You're just his latest project." Her silence was deafening. After a long pause she said, "That's not true. Rob's not like that." "Are you serious?" I barked. "How blind can you be? He's been lying to you this whole time, just like you've been lying to me." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know, Ethan. I swear I didn't. I wasn't buying it. You didn't want to know. You chose to believe him because it was easier than admitting you were wrong." She started crying, but I didn't feel any sympathy. For months, she'd let this man into our lives, risking everything we built. And now, when faced with the truth, she still wanted to defend him. "Here's the deal," I said coldly. "Rob's not coming near Jamie. If I find out you've let him anywhere near our son, I'll do whatever it takes to keep him away from you too. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered. I hung up before she could say anything else. I was done listening to her excuses. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over the situation. But as much as I wanted to cut Melissa out of my life completely, I couldn't. Jamie needed his mom, no matter how badly she'd screwed up. What I didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. For a few days after that call, things were quiet. Melissa stopped texting me, and I started focusing on Jamie and my work. I was beginning to feel like I was regaining some control over my life. But then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Ethan, we need to talk. It's important. Call me when you can. Rob." I stared at the message, my stomach turning. Rob had the audacity to contact me? I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my phone against the wall. My first instinct was to ignore him, but curiosity got the better of me. I called the number, ready to unload on him. He answered on the first ring. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm and smooth, "I figured you'd want to hear my side of the story." "You figured wrong," I snapped. "The only thing I want to hear from you is that you're leaving my family alone." "Your family?" he said with a bitter laugh. "Come on, man. Melissa's not some innocent victim here. She came to me." His words hit like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" "Look," he continued, "I didn't force her into anything. She told me how unhappy she was with you, how you were always working and never paying attention to her. I just filled the gaps." My grip tightened on the phone. "You don't know anything about our marriage." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I know what she told me. And I know she wasn't happy. Honestly, I think she's better off without you." "Don't you dare talk about my wife," I growled. "Or my family." "She's not your wife anymore, Ethan," he said smugly. "She's already made her choice." That was it. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. My hands were shaking as I paced the kitchen, replaying his words over and over. Was Melissa feeding him these lies? Or was this just another one of his manipulations? The next day I called Melissa. "We need to talk," I said. She sounded nervous. "About what?" "About the lies you've been telling Rob. He called me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "He called you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah. And he had a lot to say about how unhappy you are. Care to explain?" She started crying. "I never meant for this to happen. I was venting to him, that's all. I didn't think he'd twist things like that." "So you admit you told him I was neglecting you?" I demanded. "I didn't mean it like that." She sobbed. "I was frustrated, Ethan. You were always at work and I felt so alone. I just needed someone to talk to. Her excuses were like salt in an open wound. And instead of talking to me, you went to him. You let him into our lives, into our house, and now he thinks he's the victim in all this. I'm sorry, she said, but it sounded hollow. I didn't know what else to do. Her words confirmed what I already suspected. Melissa wasn't just a victim of Rob's manipulation. She had played an active role in tearing our family apart. She wanted to feel better about herself and she used Rob to do it, at my expense. You made your choices, Melissa, I said coldly. Now you get to live with them. Before she could respond, I hung up. My trust in her was gone, and any hope of fixing things felt impossible. I thought that was the end of the drama, but later that night I got another bombshell. A friend of mine, Mark, called me out of the blue. Ethan, I don't know how to say this, he began, but I saw Melissa and Rob at the mall today. They were with Jamie. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. What? Are you sure? Positive, Mark said. I didn't want to get involved, but I thought you should know. My blood boiled. She'd promised to keep Rob away from Jamie, and now she was parading him around in public like some happy little family? I didn't even think. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to her sister's house. When I got there, Melissa opened the door, looking startled. Ethan, what are you doing here? Where's Jamie? I demanded. He's inside playing, she said cautiously. Why? Did you take him to the mall with Rob? I asked, my voice rising. Her eyes widened and she started stammering. I just ran into him. It wasn't planned. Don't lie to me, I snapped. Do you think I'm stupid? Mark saw you with him. She froze, realizing she was caught. Ethan, I didn't mean for it to happen. Rob showed up out of nowhere and Jamie wanted to say hi. Don't you dare use Jamie as an excuse, I said, cutting her off. You swore you'd keep that man away from our son, and now you're parading him around like some kind of stepdad? Melissa started crying again, but I didn't care. You've crossed the line, Melissa. If you think I'm going to let this slide, you're dead wrong. I turned and left, my mind racing. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Rob replace me in Jamie's life. That night, I sat in my car for almost an hour trying to calm down. My mind was spinning. Melissa had promised to keep Rob away from Jamie, but now she was out in public with him? It felt like every boundary I set meant nothing to her. I texted her later, keeping it short. You lied to me again. Don't make this worse. Rob stays away from Jamie. Final warning. She replied almost immediately. Ethan, it wasn't like that. I didn't plan it. Please don't be mad. I didn't respond. I was too angry. The next day I called a lawyer. I didn't want to take drastic steps, but if Melissa kept crossing the line, I needed to be ready. I explained the situation and the lawyer was blunt. If Rob stayed involved, I had grounds to push for full custody. That gave me some relief. At least I had options. But I also knew this fight was far from over. A few days passed without a word from Melissa. For once I felt some peace. But it didn't last. She called one evening, her voice shaky. Ethan, we need to talk about custody, she said. Why? I asked, already bracing for another excuse. She hesitated. I think it's time we set a schedule. For Jamie's sake. I almost laughed. For Jamie's sake. Or because you don't want me digging into what you're doing with Rob. She sighed. I just want things to be civil. We don't need to make this harder than it already is. Her tone made my blood boil. She wanted to play the victim, like this wasn't her doing. Fine, I said. We'll figure something out. But Rob doesn't come near him. Ever. She started to protest, but I cut her off. I mean it, Melissa. If I find out he's around Jamie again, we're done talking. There was a long silence before she finally agreed. Okay, she whispered. I'll respect that. I didn't believe her, but at least now the lines were drawn. I had to stay sharp. I knew this wasn't the end of it. A week later, things seemed quiet, too quiet. I was picking Jamie up from school when he casually said, Mommy's friend Rob bought me a toy. I froze. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Jamie held up a small action figure. He came over yesterday and gave me this. Mommy said it was a surprise. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd broken her promise. Again. That evening I called her. Jamie told me about Rob, I said coldly. Are you seriously still letting him near our son? Melissa didn't even try to deny it. Ethan, it was just a toy. He was trying to be nice. Trying to be nice? I snapped. He has no place in Jamie's life. You agreed to this. I didn't think it was a big deal, she said, her voice defensive. You're overreacting. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. This wasn't just about a toy, it was about trust. And Melissa had just shown me once again that I couldn't count on her to do the right thing. I sat down that night and started drafting a formal custody agreement with my lawyer. I didn't want this fight, but Melissa was leaving me no choice. A few days later, my lawyer had a draft ready. It outlined everything: a custody schedule, clear boundaries about who could be around Jamie, and consequences if Melissa didn't comply. I felt sick thinking about how far this had gone, but I knew it was necessary. When I handed her the papers during a scheduled drop-off, her face fell. What's this? She asked, flipping through the pages. It's the agreement, I said firmly. We need to make things official. For Jamie. She frowned. You're really going to lawyers now? What choice do I have, Melissa? I said, my voice steady. You've ignored every boundary I've set. This is to protect Jamie. She stared at me, her lips trembling. I didn't think you'd go this far. You didn't think I'd fight for my son? I shot back. Melissa, you're the one who went too far. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She didn't argue. She just nodded and got back in her car. I watched her drive away, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. For the first time I felt like I was taking control. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day after I handed Melissa the custody papers, she called me. Her tone was calm, almost calculated, and I could tell she'd been rehearsing what to say. Ethan, I've been thinking about the agreement, she started. I don't think it's fair. I leaned back in my chair, already bracing for an argument. Fair? Melissa, you've broken every promise you've made about Rob. I have to protect Jamie. She sighed, and I could hear the irritation creeping into her voice. I'm his mother. Do you really think I would ever put him in harm's way? Rob isn't dangerous. Melissa, that's not the point, I said firmly. This isn't about whether you think he's safe. You're making decisions that affect Jamie's life without considering how it impacts him, or me. That's not true. She snapped, her calm demeanor cracking. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Rob isn't trying to replace you, Ethan. I felt my blood pressure rise. You're kidding, right? He gave Jamie a toy, and you're parading him around like he's family. How do you think that makes Jamie feel? Or me, for that matter? There was a long pause on her end. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but no less defensive. He was just being nice. I didn't think it would be a big deal. It is a big deal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You promised to keep Rob away from Jamie, and you broke that promise. This agreement is to make sure it doesn't happen again. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing, like she was trying to decide whether to argue or give in. Finally she said, I talked to a lawyer. That caught me off guard. Oh. And what did they say? They think this agreement is too harsh, she said, her words clipped. They said it paints me as an unfit mother. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my frustration in check. Melissa, this isn't about making you look bad. It's about creating clear boundaries so Jamie doesn't get dragged into this mess. Don't twist it into something it's not. It feels like you're punishing me, she said, her voice trembling now. You're taking everything away from me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Melissa, you did this. You let Rob into our lives, you lied to me, and now you're acting like the victim. I'm just trying to protect our son. She let out a bitter laugh. Protect him from what? Rob isn't some monster, Ethan. You're treating this like he's a threat. I could feel my patience wearing thin. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about Rob's intentions. It's about the fact that Jamie doesn't need another man in his life. He has a father. Me. Her tone softened, almost pleading. Ethan, I don't want to fight with you. Can't we work this out without lawyers? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. We've tried that, Melissa. You've had chance after chance to do the right thing, and you've ignored every boundary I've set. This isn't about what's convenient for you. It's about what's best for Jamie. She was silent for a moment, then said, You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, Melissa, I said, my voice steady. You're the one who made this hard. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She let out a shaky breath, like she was trying not to cry. I never wanted it to be like this. Neither did I said. But here we are. After another long pause, she said, Fine. I'll talk to my lawyer. But don't think this is over. I wouldn't expect anything less, I replied, my tone flat. She hung up without another word, leaving me sitting there, feeling a strange mix of anger and exhaustion. I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear from her, but I was prepared for whatever came next. I had to be. For Jamie's sake. A week passed after that call, and true to her word, Melissa wasn't done. She started sending me messages almost daily, alternating between guilt trips, emotional pleas, and outright accusations. It felt like a roller coaster, and every message left me more drained than the last. One evening, she texted me out of the blue. Do you really think I'm a bad mom? After everything I've done for Jamie? I didn't take the bait. Instead, I replied, This isn't about being a bad mom. It's about keeping Jamie safe and giving him stability. That's all I care about. She shot back almost immediately. You're turning him against me, Ethan. He's been distant whenever I see him. That's your fault. That stung, but I knew it wasn't true. I'd gone out of my way to keep Jamie's feelings about his mom positive. Every time he asked about her, I reassured him that she loved him and wanted the best for him. But Melissa wanted someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. A few days later, she changed tactics. She called me late at night, sounding more desperate than before. Ethan, please, she said. I don't want this to go to court. Can't we just sit down and figure this out like adults? I sighed, already weary of where this was headed. Melissa, we've tried that. You've crossed every boundary we agreed on. I don't trust you to stick to your word anymore. Her voice cracked. You're being so unfair. Rob isn't a bad person. He's been nothing but kind to Jamie. And that's exactly the problem, I said sharply. You're letting him act like he's part of this family when he's not. Jamie doesn't need another father figure, especially not someone like him. Someone like him. She repeated, her tone defensive. You don't even know him. I know enough, I snapped. And I've heard plenty from people who do. He's manipulative, Melissa. You might not see it now, but you will eventually. She started crying, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen this pattern before, tears to deflect from her actions, excuses to shift the blame. You've made your choices, I said firmly. Now I'm making mine. After I hung up, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I hated how cold I'd become, but it felt like the only way to protect myself and Jamie. Every conversation with Melissa was a battle, and I was running out of energy. 2 days later, I got an email from her lawyer. It was a response to the custody agreement I'd proposed. They wanted changes, more time for Melissa, no restrictions on who could be around Jamie, and a demand to split decision-making equally. It was a slap in the face. I called my lawyer immediately. She's not taking this seriously, I said. She's trying to get away with everything. We'll fight it, my lawyer reassured me. But this is just the beginning. Be prepared for a long process. I hung up feeling defeated. I wanted this to be over, but it was clear Melissa wasn't going to make that easy. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. I wasn't backing down, not this time. As the days turned into weeks, the custody battle became all-consuming. I spent hours with my lawyer, gathering evidence, documenting everything, and preparing for the inevitable court hearing. Meanwhile, Melissa's behavior became more erratic. She started showing up unannounced at Jamie's school during my custody time, claiming she just wanted to check in. One day, the school secretary called me concerned. "Mr. Daniels, Melissa was here again today." She didn't cause a scene, but Jamie seemed confused. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "I'll handle it." When I confronted Melissa about it, she brushed it off. "I'm his mother, Ethan. I have every right to see him." "You're violating the agreement," I shot back. "If this keeps happening, I'll bring it up in court." Her tone turned icy. "Do whatever you want. You're not going to take Jamie away from me." Her words hung in the air long after the call ended. I knew this was her way of trying to rattle me, to make me second-guess everything. But it only strengthened my resolve. Just when I thought things couldn't get messier, I got a call from Karen, Rob's ex-wife. "Ethan, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but Rob moved out of town last week," she said. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. "He moved?" "Yeah. I think he's trying to avoid the drama. He's done this before, gets what he wants, then disappears when things get complicated." I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, Rob being out of the picture was a relief. On the other hand, it left me wondering how Melissa would react. Had she known he was leaving? Or would this be another betrayal she'd have to face? That evening I called her, needing answers. "Did you know Rob moved away?" I asked bluntly. Her silence told me everything. "He didn't tell me," she finally admitted, her voice small. "I found out yesterday." "And what? You weren't going to mention it?" I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I didn't think it mattered," she said quickly. "He's not involved anymore." "Not involved?" I scoffed. "He's been at the center of this entire mess, Melissa. And now he's just gone." She started crying again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the usual manipulative sobbing, it was genuine. "I made a mistake," she choked out. "I trusted the wrong person, and now I've ruined everything." For the first time her words felt real. But it didn't change the damage that had been done. "You're right," I said quietly. "You did ruin everything. And now we have to fix it, for Jamie." She didn't respond, and I hung up, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and exhaustion. Rob might have been out of the picture, but the mess he left behind was still ours to deal with. The court date was looming, and I knew I had to focus on what mattered: securing Jamie's future. My lawyer reassured me we had a strong case, especially with Rob gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa wasn't done fighting. The next week would be critical, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario in my head. Melissa and I hadn't spoken since our last call about Rob, but I could feel the tension building. This was it, the moment where everything would be laid bare. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, with my lawyer by my side. Melissa showed up a little later, looking tired but polished, her lawyer in tow. She gave me a weak smile, but I didn't return it. I wasn't here to make peace, I was here to fight for Jamie. The hearing began with both sides presenting their arguments. My lawyer focused on Melissa's repeated violations of boundaries, her poor judgment in involving Rob, and her inability to prioritize Jamie's well-being. We presented the evidence: the video footage, the texts, and even testimonies from mutual friends who had seen Rob around Jamie. When it was Melissa's turn, she played the victim. She admitted to poor choices, but insisted she had Jamie's best interests at heart. She painted me as controlling and overly harsh, claiming I'd been distant during our marriage, and that she'd turned to Rob for emotional support. Her lawyer emphasized that Rob was no longer in the picture, and argued that the restrictions I wanted were excessive. I sat there seething as she twisted the narrative. But I kept my composure. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about protecting Jamie. Then came the part one dreaded: cross-examinations. Melissa's lawyer grilled me about the camera I installed, implying it was an invasion of privacy. I stayed calm, explaining that I'd only resorted to it after noticing Melissa's suspicious behavior. "It wasn't about spying," I said firmly. "It was about finding the truth." Next, my lawyer questioned Melissa. This was where things got interesting. When asked about Rob, she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He was a friend, she said. But I see now that I made mistakes. Did you prioritize this friendship over your marriage and your child's stability? My lawyer pressed. Melissa stammered, trying to explain herself, but it was clear she had no good answer. The judge took notes, his expression unreadable. Then my lawyer dropped the bombshell. Were you aware that Rob has a history of manipulating women and abandoning them when things get difficult? Melissa's face went pale. I didn't know that until recently, she admitted. So you trusted someone you barely knew, someone with a questionable past, to be around your child? My lawyer asked, her tone sharp. Melissa broke down, sobbing. I made a mistake, she said again, her voice shaking. I didn't realize what I was doing. It was a hard moment to watch, even for me. But it was the truth and it needed to come out. After hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge delivered his decision. Custody would be split, but Jamie's primary residence would remain with me. Melissa would have visitation rights, but only under strict conditions. Rob, or anyone like him, was not to be involved in Jamie's life, and any violations of the agreement would result in immediate legal consequences. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Jamie would have stability, and I had the tools to protect him. As we left the courtroom, Melissa approached me. Her eyes were red, and she looked more defeated than I'd ever seen her. Ethan, she said quietly, I'm sorry. For everything. I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. Take care of yourself, Melissa. For Jamie's sake. She nodded back and walked away, leaving me standing there with a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, relief, and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could start to move forward. It's been a few months since the court date, and things have settled down. Jamie is doing well, he's back to his cheerful self, and I'm doing everything I can to keep life as normal as possible for him. Melissa has stuck to the agreement so far, and while we're not exactly on friendly terms, we're managing to co-parent without too much drama. As for me, I'm taking things one day at a time. The betrayal still stings, but I'm learning to focus on what matters. My son, my work, and rebuilding the life Melissa tried to tear apart. It's not easy, but I'm getting there. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can finally breathe again.